The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sand and scrub brush that swallowed hope as readily as it did water. Sarah clutched the bundle closer to her chest, her arms aching from hours of walking. The baby hadn't cried in over an hour, and that silence terrified her more than any sound could. She had been walking for 3 days now, ever since the stagecoach had been attacked. The bandits had taken everything, the horses, the luggage, even the shoes off the driver's feet before they shot him. Sarah had hidden behind a boulder with the baby, pressing her hand over the infant's mouth to keep her quiet. When the outlaws finally rode away, she emerged to find herself alone in the wasteland with a child that wasn't hers. The sun was merciless overhead, turning the air into something thick and oppressive. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her throat so dry that swallowing felt like choking on sand. The baby stirred weakly in her arms, letting out a small whimper that broke Sarah's heart. She had nothing left to give, no water, no milk, no strength. That's when she saw him. At first, he was just a dark shape wavering in the heat shimmer, possibly a mirage conjured by her desperate mind. But as he drew closer, she could make out the details, a man on horseback, wearing a black hat pulled low over his eyes and a long duster coat that billowed behind him like dark wings. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged in this harsh landscape, someone who had made peace with its cruelty. Sarah's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, still clutching the baby, as the rider approached. Through blurred vision, she watched him dismount and walk toward her. His boots crunched on the hard-packed earth, each step measured and deliberate. "Please," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "The baby, she needs water." The man knelt beside her, and for the first time, Sarah could see his face properly. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous look, but his hands were gentle as he produced a canteen from his belt. "Small sips," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. He helped her drink first, supporting her head with one hand while holding the canteen to her lips with the other. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing Sarah had ever experienced. After she'd had enough, he dampened his bandana and carefully moistened the baby's lips. The infant stirred, her tiny mouth working reflexively, and the cowboy continued his ministrations with surprising tenderness. "What are you doing out here alone?" he asked, studying Sarah's face. "This is no place for a woman and child." "The stagecoach," Sarah managed. "Bandits. They killed the driver. I hid with the baby." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "McCready's gang, most like. They've been hitting coaches all along this route." He glanced around at the empty desert. "You're lucky to be alive." "How long ago?" 3 days. Maybe 4. I lost track." He let out a low whistle. "You walked 3 days in this heat with a baby. Lady, you've got more grit than sense." But there was something like respect in his voice. He looked down at the infant in Sarah's arms, and his expression changed. Something flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "Where's the child's mother?" This was the moment Sarah had been dreading. "I don't know. She was on the coach, but when the shooting started, she pushed the baby into my arms and ran. I think she thought they wouldn't shoot a woman, that she could reason with them." Sarah's voice broke. "I heard her screaming, and then, nothing. It's not my baby," she added quickly, seeing the question forming in his eyes. "I'm just a passenger. I was traveling to Santa Fe to meet my brother." The mother, she was desperate. "She thrust the child at me and told me to hide. I didn't even know her name." The cowboy was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the baby's face. The infant had fallen asleep against Sarah's chest, her tiny fist curled near her mouth. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, she was a beautiful child, with a dusting of dark hair and delicate features. "She can't be more than a few months old," the cowboy said quietly. "Too young to be traveling through this territory. Parents must have been desperate." He straightened up, offering Sarah his hand. "Come on. My horse can carry all 3 of us to the next town. It's about 10 miles northwest." Sarah took his hand gratefully, but as he helped her to her feet, something fell from the folds of the blanket wrapped around the baby. It hit the ground with a soft clink, and the cowboy bent to retrieve it before Sarah could react. It was a locket, silver and tarnished with age, hanging from a delicate chain. The cowboy turned it over in his palm, his face going suddenly pale beneath his tan. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Sarah couldn't see what was inside, but she watched the color drain completely from the man's face. He stared at the locket for what felt like an eternity, his throat working as though he was trying to swallow something sharp. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely above a whisper, rough with emotion. "It was with the baby," Sarah said, confused by his reaction. Pinned to her blanket. "I didn't think to look at it." "What's wrong?" The cowboy held out the locket with a shaking hand. Inside, Sarah could see two small photographs, one of a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair, the other of the cowboy himself, though younger and without the scar. Between the photographs, engraved in elegant script, was a name, James. "That's you," Sarah said, looking from the photograph to the man's face. "But how, Lily?" The cowboy, James, breathed. His eyes were fixed on the photograph of the woman. Her name was Lily. He looked at Sarah with an intensity that made her step back. "You said the woman who gave you the baby ran toward the bandits. What did she look like?" Sarah tried to remember, but everything about that day was a blur of terror and confusion. "Dark hair, young. She was wearing a blue dress, I think. She had kind eyes. She looked at the baby like." Sarah paused, swallowing hard. Like her heart was breaking. James turned his attention back to the sleeping infant. His hand reached out, hovering over the baby's face, but he didn't quite touch her. "I never knew," he said hoarsely. "I never knew she was carrying my child." The story came out in fragments as they rode toward town, Sarah sitting behind James on his horse with the baby cradled between them. James told her about Lily, the woman he had loved and lost 2 years ago. They had been planning to marry, but her family had disapproved. James was just a ranch hand then, with nothing to offer but hard work and honest intentions. Lily's father had other plans for his daughter, a wealthy merchant from back east who could give her a life of comfort and respectability. "She told me it was over," James said, his voice flat with old pain. "Said she'd made her choice, that her father was right and I was just a foolish dream. I left town that same night. Couldn't bear to see her marry someone else." He had spent the last 2 years drifting, working various ranches, trying to outrun the memory of the woman he'd loved. He'd heard, through the occasional letter from friends back home, that Lily had married the merchant as planned. She'd moved away, they said. Started a new life. James had tried to be happy for her, tried to forget. She must have been running from him, James said now, his jaw tight. From her husband. Why else would she be out here, traveling through bandit country with a baby? Sarah thought about the desperate look on the woman's face, the way she'd thrust the baby into Sarah's arms without hesitation. She wanted her child to live, Sarah said softly. Whatever else was happening, she wanted that more than anything. They reached the town, little more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a dusty main street, as the sun was setting. James took them directly to the doctor's house, a small structure at the edge of town with a neatly painted sign hanging from the porch. The doctor, an elderly man with wire-rimmed spectacles and gentle hands, examined both Sarah and the baby while James waited outside, pacing like a caged animal. "The child is dehydrated and malnourished, but she'll survive," the doctor announced, emerging from his examination room an hour later. "You got her here just in time. Another day out there, and..." He shook his head, leaving the sentence unfinished. "The young lady is exhausted and sunburned, but nothing some rest and proper meals won't cure." James nodded, his face unreadable. "Thank you, Doc." He pulled out a worn leather wallet and counted out bills. "Whatever they need, I'll cover it." The doctor raised his eyebrows. "The child yours. She's mine," James said, and though his voice was steady, Sarah could hear the weight of that claim. "I'll be making arrangements for her care." Over the next few days, as Sarah recovered her strength, she watched James transform. He threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he must have once brought to breaking horses or mending fences. He bought supplies, bottles and diapers, blankets and clothes, all the countless things a baby needed. He found a wet nurse, a kind woman named Martha who had recently lost her own infant and welcomed the chance to care for another. But at night, Sarah would sometimes see him standing on the boarding house porch, staring out at the dark desert, his face etched with grief. He was mourning Lily, Sarah realized. Mourning the woman who had carried his child for months, who had faced whatever horrors her life had become, who had ultimately sacrificed herself to save their daughter. "I have to know what happened to her," James said one evening, finding Sarah on that same porch. The baby, they had named her Emma, after James's mother, was sleeping peacefully in Martha's care. "I have to know if there's any chance she survived." Sarah wanted to tell him not to hope, that no one could survive the brutality of men like McCready's gang. But she saw the need in his eyes, the desperate hunger for closure or redemption or both, and she couldn't bring herself to extinguish it. "The sheriff is forming a posse," she said instead. "I heard them talking about it in town. They're going after the gang. Maybe they'll find something." James was with that posse when they rode out the next morning. Sarah watched them go, a line of determined men on horseback, armed and grim-faced. She spent the day helping Martha care for Emma, marveling at how this tiny life had already changed everything. They returned 3 days later. Sarah knew from James's face that he had found his answers, though not the ones he'd hoped for. The posse had tracked the McCready gang to their hideout and there had been a fierce gunfight. Most of the bandits were dead or captured, and in a shallow grave behind their camp, they had found 4 bodies, 2 men from other stagecoach robberies and 2 women. One of them was wearing a blue dress, James said quietly. He was sitting on the porch steps, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. The sheriff said they'd been dead about a week. There was no way to. He stopped, swallowing hard. No way to identify them proper. The desert and the animals, they. Sarah sat down beside him, not touching but close enough that he'd know he wasn't alone. "She saved her daughter," she said. "In the end, that's what mattered to her. Emma is alive because of what she did." James nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about those months," he said. "She was carrying our child, and she was alone. Her husband must have figured out Emma wasn't his. Maybe that's why she was running. Maybe his hands clenched into fists. I should have been there. I should have stayed, should have fought for her instead of running away like a coward." "You didn't know," Sarah said firmly. "You can't blame yourself for not knowing." "Can't I?" James looked at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I left her. When things got hard, when her father said no, I just left. I told myself it was for the best, that she'd be happier without me. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared I wasn't good enough, wasn't strong enough to fight for what we had. And now she's gone, and all I have left of her is a baby who'll never know her mother." The tears finally fell, tracking clean lines through the dust on his face. Sarah reached out and took his hand, holding it tightly while he grieved. Around them, the town continued its evening routines, people walking past without stopping, respecting the privacy of his pain. When James finally spoke again, his voice was steadier. "I'm going to be a father," he said. "A real one. I'm going to give Emma everything I couldn't give Lily. A home, a name, a life worth living. She's going to know she was wanted, that she was loved by both her parents, even if one of them never got the chance to hold her." Sarah squeezed his hand. "She's lucky to have you." "No," James said, looking toward the boarding house where Emma slept. "I'm the lucky one. Lily gave me a gift I never deserved. She could have left the baby with anyone, but she chose to save her. She pinned that locket to Emma's blanket knowing that someday, somehow, I might see it. She was giving me a second chance, even after everything." He stood up, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I'm done drifting," he said. "I'm going to buy some land, build a house. Raise my daughter right, give her all the love her mother would have given her if she'd lived." Sarah stood too, smoothing her skirt. "What about me?" she asked. "I still need to get to Santa Fe." James smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Stay," he said, "at least for a while. Emma knows you. You saved her life. She's going to need someone who remembers her mother, who can tell her the story of how brave Lily was." He paused, looking suddenly uncertain. "And I could use a friend. Someone who understands." Sarah thought about her brother waiting in Santa Fe, about the life she'd planned before the stagecoach attack. Then she thought about the tiny baby sleeping inside, about the man standing before her trying to piece together a future from the shards of his broken past. She thought about Lily, dying in the desert but fighting until her last breath to save her child. "I'll stay," she said. "For a while, at least." James nodded, relief evident in his face. He pulled the locket from his pocket. He'd been carrying it ever since that first day, and opened it once more. The photographs looked back at them, frozen in time, capturing a love that had survived separation, hardship, and even death. "I'll give this to Emma when she's old enough," he said. "Tell her about her mother, about how much she was loved. About the woman who was brave enough to face bandits if it meant her baby might live." As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, James and Sarah stood together on the porch. Inside, Emma began to cry, a healthy, strong cry that spoke of life continuing, of hope surviving even the darkest circumstances. James moved toward the door, ready to comfort his daughter, but he paused and looked back at Sarah. "Thank you," he said simply. "For not giving up on her. For bringing her home to me." Sarah smiled. "She brought me home too," she said, and realized it was true. This dusty frontier town, this makeshift family, this unexpected life, somehow, against all odds, she had found where she belonged.